Hello and happy 4th of July from the Liberty Cause. Today I'd like to just quickly go over this article from the West Volusia Beacon written by Al Everson. I want to point out a few things in this. This is an article about Deltona's knee-jerk reaction to words, to the residents of the city finally finding the courage in larger numbers to stand up to these thugs, these dictators that are running the city. Now you'll see that they brought in a metal detector, which I call it a word detector, because really that's what they're afraid of. They've shown absolutely no evidence whatsoever that any credible threat has ever been made, that anybody's ever threatened violence or harm against them, only that they don't like words. And they've made that very clear. You'll see in a previous video that I did that I can link below that they're actually trying to change the wording of an ordinance because to strengthen it against words that they don't like. Specifically, this comes from the mayor, Heidi Hirschberg. So let's go through Al's article and let's talk about whether we think this is or not libel. Personally, my thought on this is that this is a very libelous article and that Al makes some very libelous statements. And talk is going on right now about potentially challenging this in court with the paper. Okay, so you did not get to decide the language we choose, said a speaker at the July 1st meeting on the Deltona City Commission who identified himself as Liberty Cause. Actually was not identified at all. Didn't identify as Liberty Cause, just started talking. To stress his point, Liberty Cause set off an F-bomb and held a sign bearing the obscenity. So let's start off with Al's choice of words here, where he is injecting his personal point of view. Now, what is a reporter supposed to do? Who, what, when, where, and why. Journalism 101. Okay? Who, what, when, where, and why. I'm wondering if Al went to any sort of higher education to learn communications and journalism, because he would have learned you do not inject your own personal opinions or your personal morals into the story. Who, what, when, where, and why. So he chooses the word obscenity. Well, the word obscenity has been clearly defined by the Supreme Court as something that has to be sexual in nature, or it is uttered or said to titillate. Okay, so you have to be when you use this word, it has to be used in a manner that is meant to describe a sexual act. That's not at all what happened here. This particular sign said, "Respect my fucking First Amendment." Does that sound like it was describing a sexual act or meant to titillate? Don't think so. Goes on to talk about, what else, Liberty Cause and other speakers. And then here's my favorite one. You're going to tell me what kind of language I can use? Pat Gibson asked commissioners, following up with a string, pay attention closely, with a string of vulgar words. Well, given that we recorded this entire meeting, I can tell you and bear witness to the fact that there were no vulgar words spoken, period. Again, as according to the law, this is Al's personal opinion. This is Al injecting his morals into a publication. What he's doing here is he is defaming the character of Pat Gibson by saying that she used vulgar words. There are legal definitions as to what are vulgar words. Al does not get to decide what words are vulgar. The courts do, and they have. Okay? So in my personal opinion, what he's done here is an act of defamation of character against Ms. Gibson. I can also tell you that she did not string any of these words together. She started off with the F word once, and then later, after several more words and probably a good 30 to 45 seconds of talking, she used the word bullshit. That's not stringing together vulgar words. That's libel, Al. You've lied in a publication, and we've got the video to prove it. Some spectators once again showed up with signs demanding city manager Jane Chang be fired. Again, obscene and vulgar language poured forth from those who came to test the committee's or city commission's revised operating rules. Al, none of the words used were legally obscene or vulgar. This is you injecting your own twisted set of morals from some bygone era. And it's not much appreciated, Al. Because city officials feared a possible outbreak of violence. Let's look at this sentence. Because they feared a possible outbreak of violence. The only thing that could ever even be remotely, even remotely thought of as violence was, when Mike Williams, who most people know, this is talked about, a lot, has made a ton of money off of the city. He is one of the people who comes in there and never has a bad word to say about the city policy. He is often referred to, I've heard by many, as a bootlicker, among other, other terms. But he actually brought a shovel to a city commission meeting once. And I did not see this personally. I have to go back to my video that I was recording to see if it picked it up. But I do have at least two witnesses that I witnessed the fact and have told me that he actually picked that shovel up and shook it toward another person in what was considered by them to be a threatening manner. Now, this is one of their quote-unquote buddies. Brought a shovel to a city commission meeting. And again, I don't know, I'm not stating this as a fact because it's hearsay to me. Potentially I could get these people on and have them, tell their story, what they saw. But I have been told by two people who claim to be eyewitnesses that he actually shook that shovel in a threatening manner, which then got a deputy to come and take the shovel away from him and set it off to the side. So the city officials fear a possible outbreak of violence when the only violence that's ever occurred, but even potentially, was by one of their buddies. Not by the people who are standing up to them, not by the people who are tired of having their rights violated. There's never been any threats made. There's never been any threats of violence, any acts of violence, or anything that would even seem remotely violent. It's words. Heidi Hertzberg is afraid of words. This is nothing new for her. She has been trying to get a civility ordinance passed for a long time. Heidi wants to make demands on people of what is and is not civil. And Heidi does not get to make those demands. Everyone going from the lobby into the city commission chambers was required to put his or her personal effects, wallets, purse, keys, cameras, blah, 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 into plastic bins and walk through a metal detector. Remember, again, it's a word detector. It's a word detector. That's what it is. They're looking for, hoping that they can detect people who may bring words that they don't like into what they call their chambers. As a matter of fact, John Mazarzik once, when he was the mayor, actually once referred to the residents who were in the audience as guests in his house. Guests in his house. The city commission chambers, the people that were there to take part in their government, he called them guests in his house. In my last video, we kind of went through the wording of what this the language that they want to add to this ordinance. So I'm not going to rehash that here. We can go back. You can go back to the other video, watch it. and get a much better idea. So Herzberg says she and other members of the city commission understand where freedom of speech stops and where personal attacks and profanity and vulgarity begin. Well, I don't think they do. And I will go as far as to say I think part of the reason that they do not is because of the legal advice they're being given. And I'm just going to give a very quick, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Maybe I'll do another video on how this works for people who don't understand. So the cases go before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court writes an opinion, and that opinion then becomes the law of the land. So in one case, we can go all the way back to the early 1900s, and this is where the phrase that so many people have heard, "you can't yell fire in a crowded theater," comes from. So in that particular case, they decided on a doctrine that if you used words that created imminent danger, so words that created imminent danger, that was the bar that had to be met. And in a later case, Brandenburg versus Ohio, the Schenck case actually was overturned, and that wording was changed to "would incite imminent lawlessness." So now the words that people use would have to incite imminent lawlessness. What is imminent lawlessness as defined by the court? That is that people would have to, if I get up there and I use certain language that Heidi deems offensive, profane, or vulgar, if I do not incite the other people in the audience to start breaking the law, they don't start throwing chairs, they don't start breaking things, tearing down the walls, they don't get up and physically rush the dais and attack the commission, well, then I have not incited imminent lawlessness. So I don't think she really does understand what this means. I don't think she truly understands what she's talking about. But back to my point. So as years go by, new cases come to the Supreme Court. They look at old case law. They look to decide if that case law was proper and really should have applied. And in a lot of these cases where we finally end up with Cohen versus California, they keep overturning these old decisions. One of the reasons for the decision in Cohen versus California is a case called Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, which was, that was a 1940 case where the fighting words doctrine was decided upon. So there was this doctrine called, the fighting words doctrine. What that meant was any words that would incite violence, simple violence in another person. I say something to you, it brings you to the point where you now want to physically have a physical confrontation. You want to have a fight with me because of those words. And by the time we got around to Cohen versus California in the late 60s, the courts had already, they've been looking for a reason to redefine the fighting words doctrine because it was so overly broad. And they narrowed the fighting words doctrine down dramatically. So now it's very specific what would incite someone to want to physically have a fight with you. It's not this very broad, you're a Nazi. Oh, okay, let's fight. It's literally got to be some words that are threatening. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to do something to you. That would incite violence and incite a fight. So that's the way the courts work. And if you've got people giving them legal advice that are using old cases and not telling them that new cases have then overturned those old cases and that, the doctrine has been limited more, that language has been broadened more, then they're unaware. And they think that they know where personal attacks, profanity, and vulgarity begin, and they have no idea. And yes, the citizens are the ones who are going to foot the bill, unfortunately, if they get sued for using, for trying to enforce this unconstitutional ordinance. I have to give a little bit of credit here to our Commissioner Lauren King, who wasn't really happy with the wording of the new wording in the ordinance and wanted to talk about it further and said that he felt that it was double talk. Now, they did say here, basically went back to that whole idea that the mayor alone can, and he says, to rule on who is speaking and what is being said. And again, if you go back to that previous video that I'll link below, we did talk about the mayor's role as a ceremonial position. So what they're really talking about here is giving more power to the mayor than what the mayor actually has. So people said that they wanted to put it in a workshop. The mayor, who did not want to put it in a workshop, she wanted to get this thing passed as quickly as possible. So they took a vote on the first reading. And no, we don't have time for a workshop. We can't workshop it. And then apparently it said the commission will resume its discussion of its meeting rules and operating guiding lines in a workshop Monday, July 8th. The meeting begins at 5:30 p.m. at Deltona City Hall and is open to the public. So apparently they somehow changed their mind and they are going to put it into a workshop. Just to conclude this really quickly, I just want to go back to the way this article was written. I would, again, I'm not telling anybody what to do. I can only tell you, what, you might want to consider is if you look at this and you say, no, this newspaper has no business injecting their own personal idea of what vulgar words are, that if we're not going to stick with what the courts have decided, then we're no longer a country of laws. Now, if we want to be a constitutional republic and we want to be a country of laws, then we need to, look to what the courts have decided. If you don't think that Al Everson should be injecting his particular and personal moral point of view into what is supposed to be an entirely objective and unbiased article, then I would recommend that you give the Beacon a call, ask for the publisher, let the publisher know what you think. If you ask for the publisher or the managing editor, they'll get you through. But down here, here's a phone number that you can call them at. And here is just if you like, you can pause the video. There's an email address and a phone number. If you think, if for whatever reason you feel that even maybe you should make a few phone calls to the folks who advertise with this paper and let them know that you don't appreciate this newspaper injecting, their own moral values that really don't hold up to common day practice, common day vernacular, and common day law. And that you're not going to do business with them until they set these people straight and tell them you either be objective and you just tell the who, what, when, where, and why, or we'll find another place to advertise. Happy 4th of July from the Liberty Cause. Please like, share, and subscribe. The more we get the word out, the more we can wake people up, and the more seats we will fill in City Hall. Thomas Jefferson said, when the people fear the government, there's tyranny. When the government fears the people, we have liberty. So let's not forget that. The more people we put in those seats, the more the government's going to know that the people are not happy with them. So if we don't want to live in tyranny, we need to fill those seats and let the government know that we are there to instruct them per the Florida Constitution, that we are there to speak our minds per the First Amendment and the Florida Constitution, and that the language we choose will not be chilled. Thank you.